Have you ever felt a chill run down your spine on a perfectly ordinary night? That's how it started for them. A group of friends, young and restless, on a night that promised to be anything but ordinary. They stood at the edge of town, where the pavement surrendered to dusty gravel, and the air grew thick with the smell of pine and something else, something ancient and unknown. Before them stood the silhouette of the abandoned aqueduct, its arches like skeletal fingers reaching for the inky sky. "Dare you to go in," one of them breathed, his voice barely a whisper against the rising wind. The dare hung in the air, heavy with unspoken fears and adolescent bravado. They all felt it, the pull of the unknown, the thrill of tempting fate. It was a night for stories whispered around campfires, stories that made your blood run cold and your heart pound in your chest. But this wasn't a campfire story, this was real, and they were about to step into it. They called him Jake, the ringleader, the one who always pushed the limits. With a cocky grin and a glint in his eyes, he stepped forward.
"Don't tell me you're all too chicken."
His girlfriend Emily, a whirlwind of nervous energy and infectious laughter, shoved him playfully.
"You're the one who's going to chicken out first."
Beside Emily stood Daniel, the quiet one, the observer. He watched them, his silence speaking volumes. He wasn't afraid, not exactly. He was wary, his senses on high alert, picking up on the subtle shifts in the atmosphere, the way the air seemed to crackle with an unseen energy. The last of their group, Maya, stood a little apart, her arms wrapped around herself as if for comfort.
"Maybe we should just go back. It's creepy out here."
But her words were lost on the wind, or perhaps ignored, for the others were already moving, drawn towards the gaping maw of the aqueduct like moths to a flame. The air grew noticeably colder as they stepped into the shadow of the structure. The laughter died down, replaced by an unsettling silence broken only by the sound of their own footsteps echoing on the damp stone. The darkness inside was absolute, swallowing the weak beam of their flashlights whole. The air hung heavy and damp, thick with the smell of mildew and decay. They walked single file, their hands brushing against the rough stone walls, cold and slick with moisture.
"Anyone else feel like we're being watched?"
Emily whispered, her voice tight with nervous tension.
"It's just your imagination,"
Jake said, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. He too could feel the weight of unseen eyes upon them, hear the faint whispers that seemed to dance just beyond the reach of his flashlight's beam. Daniel, walking at the rear, felt a prickle of unease crawl up his spine. He shone his flashlight over the walls, over the crumbling bricks and the tangled webs that clung to every surface like macabre decorations. He could have sworn he saw something move in the shadows, a fleeting shape that vanished as quickly as it had appeared.
"Did you see that?"
He whispered, his voice barely audible. But the others were too caught up in their own fears to hear him. They ventured deeper into the heart of the aqueduct, the darkness closing in around them like a suffocating blanket. The air grew colder, and a bone-chilling draft snaked through the passage, carrying with it a low, mournful whisper that seemed to come from the very walls themselves.
"Did you hear that? I thought I heard someone say my name. It's just the wind,"
Jake said, but even he sounded unsure. They pressed on, each step taking them deeper into the labyrinthine depths of the aqueduct. The air grew thick with a strange energy, a palpable sense of dread that settled over them like a shroud. Suddenly, Daniel stopped, his flashlight beam falling on a patch of wall that was strangely devoid of dust and cobwebs. There, scrawled in what appeared to be charcoal, was a single word: help. A shiver ran down Daniel's spine. He reached out a hand to touch the word, his fingers tracing the rough outline of the letters. As he did so, a cold gust of wind swept through the tunnel, extinguishing his flashlight and plunging them into absolute darkness.
"Maya! Emily! S2 Jake!"
Screams filled the darkness, echoing off the stone walls, bouncing around them until it was impossible to tell who was screaming and who was merely echoing the terror. Daniel scrambled for his flashlight, his heart pounding in his chest.
"Guys, this isn't funny!"
He fumbled with the flashlight, his fingers slick with sweat. Finally, it flickered back to life, casting a weak beam into the darkness. He looked around, his blood turning to ice. They were gone, vanished.
"Daniel."
Panic seized Daniel. He spun around, his flashlight beam slashing through the darkness, searching for the source of the voice. But there was nothing there, only the endless darkness and the echoing drip of water from the unseen cracks in the ancient structure. He called out for his friends again, his voice hoarse with fear, but there was no answer. He was truly alone, or was he? The hair on the back of his neck stood on end. He could feel it now, a presence surrounding him, cold and unseen, watching him from the darkness. He started to run, his flashlight bouncing wildly, casting grotesque shadows that danced and writhed on the walls. He didn't know where he was going, only that he had to get out of this place, away from the darkness and the whispers and the unseen eyes that watched him. But the tunnel seemed to stretch on forever, twisting and turning, leading him further and further into the heart of the aqueduct. He stumbled over loose stones, his breath coming in ragged gasps, and then, just as suddenly as it had started, his flashlight flickered once and died, plunging him into absolute darkness.
Help me!
He froze, his heart pounding so loudly he could hear it in his ears. He was trapped, swallowed whole by the darkness, his fear a living thing inside him. The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel stood there, frozen in place, his every sense on high alert. He listened for any sound, any sign of his friends, but there was nothing. Only the blood pounding in his ears and the frantic beating of his own heart. He felt along the rough stone walls, his hands trembling, searching for a way out, but the passage seemed to stretch on endlessly in every direction. He was lost, hopelessly and utterly lost, in the bowels of the abandoned aqueduct. Despair threatened to consume him. He sank to his knees, his back against the cold, damp stone, and buried his face in his hands. He was alone, lost in the dark, and every instinct screamed at him that he was in terrible danger. Then, from the depths of the darkness, he heard it again. The soft whisper of his name, closer this time, sending a fresh wave of terror through him. He scrambled back, pressing himself against the wall, his eyes wide with fear, scanning the darkness for the source of the voice.
Who's there? Show yourself!
He yelled, his voice hoarse and choked with fear. But there was no answer, only the echo of his own voice bouncing off the stone walls, mocking his fear. He scrambled to his feet and began to run blindly through the darkness, his hands outstretched before him, desperate to find a way out. He ran until he stumbled and fell, his hands scraping against the rough stone floor. He lay there for a moment, catching his breath, his mind racing. He had to get out of there. He had to find his friends. He pushed himself to his feet and started to feel his way along the wall again, his heart pounding in his chest. He had to stay calm. Panicking wouldn't help him. He had to think. As he stumbled forward, he thought he saw a faint light in the distance. Hope surged through him. He picked up his pace, his heart quickening with each step. As he got closer, he realized it wasn't a flashlight, but something else, something that made his blood run cold. It was a single, flickering candle casting a dim, ethereal glow on the stone walls. It sat on a small ledge, illuminating a section of the tunnel he hadn't explored yet. But what chilled him to the bone was the inscription etched into the wall above the candle. It was the same word he had seen before, scrawled in that same chilling handwriting: help. He cautiously approached the candle, his every sense on high alert. His heart pounded in his chest, a drumbeat of fear against his ribs. Who left this candle here? Was it a trap or a desperate plea for help, just like the message on the wall? Daniel's hand trembled as he reached out to touch the word help. As his fingers brushed against the rough surface, he felt a jolt run through his body. It wasn't a physical shock, but something else, something that felt like recognition. A cold wave of air washed over him, extinguishing the candle and plunging him once again into absolute darkness. He stumbled back, his heart racing, his breath catching in his throat. He was surrounded by darkness, the silence pressing in on him from all sides. Then through the darkness he heard it, a soft sigh close to his ear, sending a shiver down his spine.
Looking for me, Daniel?
The voice was soft, almost a whisper, but it cut through the darkness like a knife. It was close, too close. He could feel the heat of another presence mere inches from his face. Daniel's blood ran cold. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. He was paralyzed by fear, trapped in that suffocating darkness with what? He didn't dare to turn around, he didn't want to see.
Who are you?
He choked out, his voice barely a whisper. The presence behind him chuckled, a low, chilling sound that echoed through the tunnel.
Don't you recognize me, Daniel? We've been waiting for you.
As the voice washed over him, a cold, clammy hand reached out from the darkness and clamped down on his shoulder. Daniel's eyes flew open, a scream dying in his throat. The darkness remained, absolute and consuming. The only sound was the echo of his racing heartbeat and the frantic whisper of the wind through the ancient stones. But Daniel was gone.